You don't have l'chaim? L'chaim v'levracha. In the Maimer, the Rebbe opens with a taich, with the Hasidic interpretation of the words Va'ato Tetzaveh, Shemeshe hu mekasher hu mechaber es bnei Yisrael im Erein Seif. That the tafkid, that the mission statement of Moshe Rabbeinu is to connect and to link each and every member of Am Yisrael with the Rabbeinu Shalom. And continuing to explain the mystical meaning of the psukim. V'al yedei shemeshe mashpia li Yisrael. By virtue of Moshe Rabbeinu's benefaction, by virtue of Moshe Rabbeinu's influence, through which he links and he connects every Yid with the Eibishter, al yedei zeh nase Yisrein v'hei sofe b'Moshe. There is a virtue, an advantage, an addition in Moshe Rabbeinu. In the Maimer, the Rebbe goes on to paraphrase the Kisvei Arizal of Parshas Ba'aleischa, which speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu, the historic Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Frierdiker Rebbe links together with the conceptual Moshe Rabbeinu, by virtue of the Tikkun Ezer of his Pashtusa de Moshe. The Rebbe invokes the metaphor of Reish, V'regel. The Rebbe is the cup, the head. We, Klal Yisrael, are the feet. And by virtue of the feet or mobility, Nimshach hagiloi do anoichi bekirbe shel Moshe. A very lofty, a very profound, and a very intense revelation of the essence of divinity resonates within Moshe. And the Rebbe concludes the second chapter of the Maimer with these words. Al yedei shemeshe yitzave v'yekasher es b'nei Yisrael im Erein Seif. By virtue of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu connects every single Yid to the Rabbeinu Shalom, to the Eibishter, al yedei ze yoviu b'nei Yisrael shemin zayis l'Moshe. By virtue of this, the Jewish people, Am Yisrael, brings Shem and Zayis, olive oil to Moshe. And the Rebbe says 4 words. Sheyesifu Teisves Eir b'Moshe, that the meaning of bringing olive oil, the meaning of bringing a Gilui, a revelation of Anoichi, means Sheyesifu Teisves Eir, that they add, there is an addition of light in Moshe. Towards the end of the Maimer, after the Rebbe's transformative innovations, in which he restates and reframes the entire thesis of the Maimer, the Rebbe returns to this subject. But this time the Rebbe uses different words. Speaking about the Yikchu Eilecha, here the Rebbe says, She Yisrael al Yedei Aveidosam Yesifu Gilui Oir. The first time around the Rebbe says, there is a Tosefes Oir. There is an addition of light. Towards the end of the Maimer, the Rebbe speaks about Yesifu, they add a Gilui. He speaks about not new light, but a revelatory experience. There's a Gilui Oir. And this time, it's not B'Meisha. It's not us proverbially providing Meisha with something, but it's B'Madregas Meisha. It's in the level of Meisha. The Maimer opens by describing our participation in the process, our involvement, the symbolism of Meisha and Bnei Yisrael, that we are bringing Shemen Zayis, V'yikchu Eilecha Shemen Zayis, that we bring a Tosefes, or we add light to Meisha. And in the end of the Maimer, the Rebbe is not speaking about an addition. The Rebbe is speaking about a Gilui, a revelation of Ur. The Rebbe is not speaking about Meisha. The Rebbe is speaking about Madregas Meisha. Not Meisha, but the level of Meisha. And if you learn Eis Yud Aleph carefully, you will see that not once does the Rebbe mention Moshe Rabbeinu. The focus of Eis Yud Aleph, Madregas Meisha, is the Pnimius HaNefesh, is the core essence that resides within each and every one of us, that was brought about through Moshe Rabbeinu's efforts. Durch dem was der Rebbe tut auf dem Minion von Rei Emunah, by virtue of the fact that the Rebbe brings forth the Emunah, by virtue of the fact that the Rebbe creates within each and every one of us a neuronic pathway to the core of our soul, there is now an opportunity for us to participate, not by adding Ur to Moshe, but by revealing the Gilui of Moshe within us. Akin to what the Alter Rebbe speaks about in Tanya and Perek Memvav, the Moshe Shebekirbei, but this is not by virtue of birth, it is not inherent. This comes from the Rebbe's efforts. The Moshe Rabbeinu, the essence that the Rebbe implanted within us, you and I are able to reveal. And the Rebbe goes on to speak about Aveda B'Keyach Atzmei, that the ultimate goal is not that the Rebbe should have to implant it within us, but that we on our own should be able to reveal and to continue to develop that which the Rebbe gives us. Das is Pshat. That is the straightforward reading of the Maimer. About 12 years ago, I met a Yid, a finer Yid, and we developed a relationship, and I began to speak to him about coming to the Ohel. Because I live and function with the belief that unser Inyan is bringen Yidden zum Rebbe. If I am a Yid, because I am a Chassid, if my neshama can be moved because of my hiskashrus, then the same applies to every single Yid. If I need to go to the Ohel, he needs to go to the Ohel. Every single Yid must go to the Ohel. Rabbi Spalter spoke about our children, a generation that wasn't zeiche yet to see the Rebbe. I was recently asked by a fellow who put on tefillin for the first time. He said to me, "Tell me the truth. There's a difference between the relationship, between the feeling that you have for the Rebbe and your children, isn't there?" I said, "I have to tell you the truth. There is a difference. They are more makusher, they are more connected, and they yearn to see the Rebbe more than their father does. I see absolutely no diminishing return, but on the contrary, Baruch Hashem in the eigene kinder, and in so many of the kinder that I'm privileged to see and speak to, as a brennen mit a fire of love, a passion for the Rebbe. They are prepared to pick up the mantle of leadership and move anywhere on shlichus. It is evident, as the Rebbe lebt mit uns und zwischen uns. So I start speaking to this Yid about coming to the Ohel. And he says, yeah, we're going to do it someday. I say, we go sometimes for Shabbos. I don't know if Shabbos is my thing, he says. I don't know about that. And we had a few trips planned, and then it was canceled. And 10 years ago, we finally have a trip planned. Ches Tishrei. He buys tickets. I was Zeicha Baruch Hashem Shabbos Slichas to be by the Ohel with a group. And we came back for Rosh Hashanah. And then I was Zeicha Vav Tishrei to be by the Ohel again. I came back to Toronto Zion Tishrei. And he calls me Zion Tishrei in the afternoon. He says to me, "Rabbi, were you just in New York yesterday?" I said I was. He said, "Weren't you just there last week?" I said I was. He said, "Isn't it Yom Kippur tomorrow?" I said, "It is." He says, "I'm canceling the tickets. It's not fair to you." I said, "You canceled those tickets, and I will never speak to you again." We come to the Ohel Ches Tishrei, and we sit down by the tables. You know, the tables in the first tent. And we start to write a Pidyon Nefesh. So I show him, Pei, Nun, Tu Streichelach. And he says to me, "What is Pei Nun?" I said, "Pidyon Nefesh." He said, "What is Pidyon Nefesh?" I said, "It's redemption of the soul." He says, "Why am I writing redemption of the soul on top of a note to the Rebbe?" I say to him, "That's a really good question." And the Rebbe says, "I don't know the answer." But I didn't tell him that. I made like a tefillah k'tzorah, Rabbeinu Shalom, give me some guidance over here. Ayid frekt a gute shaila. Nobody ever explained it to me. And I say to him, when the Rebbe was formally mekabel in Asiyas, the Rebbe said that there is a shita, there is a philosophy, a theology amongst certain chassidim that tzaddik be'emunose yichya al tikra yichya elo yichaya. The tzaddik carries you. The tzaddik uplifts you. You just have to, don't get in the way. Allow yourself to go with the flow. And the Rebbe made it very clear that is not the derech of Chabad, and it is not going to be the methodology of Deir HaShvi. The Rebbe said, "As wird helfen." The Rebbe said, "As wird sein mit uns." But the Rebbe said that you and I, we need to do the heavy lifting. We need to do the work. I said to him, Marshall, Pidyon Nefesh, we come to the Rebbe because at the core of our being, there's a beautiful neshama. There's a magnificent soul and spirit. Each and every one of us is capable, despite our being ordinary, of living in a manner extraordinary. And we're asking the Rebbe that the Rebbe should help us redeem and release and actuate our potential. And as we're speaking, he looks up over the sink. There's a picture of the Rebbe there. He looks at the picture of the Rebbe and he says, you know, that kind of makes sense. I'm only religious because of his picture. I'm like, I beg your pardon? I met this guy when he was already a Frumiyut. I said, what do you mean? He said, it's not important. I just never realized it, but it's not important. Let's go on writing the letter. We have to catch a flight soon. I said, no. You just said something. You're only observant because of the Rebbe's picture? And he tells me the following story. 8 years earlier, he had a terrible court case in front of him. A huge business fight, and it was not looking good. On a Sunday afternoon, he went shopping in the supermarket, and as he's going into the supermarket, those days it was called IGA, now it's called Sobeys, a bacher walks over to him and says, excuse me, sir, are you Jewish? He says, yeah, what's it to you? He says, would you like to put on tefillin? He says, kid, I don't even fast on Yom Kippur. I'm not putting on tefillin. It's fine. So the boy hands him a L'chaim, the publication, the L'chaim publication. Canadians are polite. Instead of throwing it away, only out of respect, he said thank you and he put it in his cart. And he was planning to throw it away at the first opportunity. He said, I move into the supermarket, I pick up this L'chaim, and I see the Rebbe's smile. I'm like, what a smile. I never saw a smile like that. It's amazing, he said. Couldn't throw it out, puts it down. Turns the next aisle, he picks it up again, and he sees the Rebbe's face, and he says, what a smile. It's an amazing smile. And he couldn't throw it away. I once heard from Rabbi Krinsky that the New York Times asked for a picture of the Rebbe. So Rabbi Krinsky asked the Rebbe, which picture should I give? And he said, the Rebbe said, es nit negeh welche Bild, aber es soll sein a Bild mit a Schmeichel. Doesn't matter which picture, it should be a picture with a smile. He said, I see the Rebbe's smile, and I can't throw the brochure away. So finally I said, okay, if I'm not going to throw it away, let me read it. Picks it up. He says something about Parsha. I never heard of a Parsha in my life. I don't know what this is. Turns the page. It doesn't make any sense to me. Turns it over in the back. There's a story. He says, oh, I like stories. Okay, read the story. You know, they're all the same story. There was a Yid. He was in trouble. And somehow, miraculously, he was saved. He said the story was a story about a Yid and he's in trouble and he has a court case. And he stayed up and he said Tehillim, the ganze Sefer Tehillim. And then he had a miracle. And he said, I'm reading the story. I said, that's funny. I have a court case tomorrow. Maybe I should find this magic book. So he checks out of the supermarket, goes next door, right next door to Sobeys is Israel's. There's a Hebrew bookstore. He walks in holding the L'chaim. Says, excuse me, you guys, you sell a Tehillim? Guy says, what? He says, you know, right here. It says something about a Tehillim. It's Tehillim. Yeah, you sell a Tehillim? Oh, sure we do. But I need English, he says. I don't read Hebrew. No problem. And he sold him an English Tehillim. He came home. He did whatever he had to do. Und hat Machlet gewen geht sich weggesetzt und sagen Tillim. He sat down to say Tillim that evening, and he finished saying Tillim at 6 o'clock in the morning. He read every single word carefully in English. By the time at 6 o'clock in the morning, he figured there's no point in going to sleep. He said, I took a shower, I drank a strong coffee, and I drove to meet my lawyer. I come into my lawyer. My lawyer says to me, Marshall, you got to settle. You're going to lose big. You're going to lose everything. If you settle, you get 50 cents on the dollar, 25 cents on the dollar. You can get something. If you go in front of that judge, you're finished. He said, nope, I'm not settling. He says, why not? He says, because I said Tehillim. The lawyer goes, what? He says, you know, I read the whole Tehillim last night. Lawyer's like, listen, I'm Jewish. You pay me a lot of money to give you advice. I'm telling you to settle. Absolutely not, he says. Going in front of the judge. And he goes in front of the judge, and he wins everything. Everything. They're walking out of the courtroom. The lawyer turns around to this guy and he says, Marsh, it's not in polite company to use the word that he used. That was a blankety blank miracle. Marshall says, I know. I said the whole Tillim. He says, I came home, I told my wife, who by the way wasn't Jewish at the time, what happened. And, you know, it kind of made sense that I should do a little more research and find out what this is all about, because it seems to be working. So he says, I went to a local Reform temple. The woman rabbi was wearing a miniskirt and playing guitar. He said, I listened for a few minutes. I said, that's what's said in that book, that pamphlet, and what's on that stage is definitely not the same thing. So he said, I left. I went to the local conservative, one of the conservative synagogues. The median age was 82. People were sleeping. It was slothful. I said, that story had energy. That story was vibrant. This is dead. This is not the same thing. He said, then I went to an Orthodox synagogue. I said, this looks like it could be. By the way, his wife is a Gieres Kahalocha. His son is a Ger Kahalocha. Hat a schwarze Hittelheint. He went to yeshiva. He's in medical school. And they're coming to the oil soon again. Der Rebbe lebt mit uns und zwischen uns. And the Rebbe finds a way to stimulate, to shake, to rattle, to inspire the neshama of every single Yid. A Yid, der zet a bild von dem Rebbe, he sees a picture of the Rebbe, and something inside him is kindled. And then he comes to the Ohel, and he puts the pieces together. The Rebbe concludes Va'ata Tetzaveh by telling us that not only does Moshe Rabbeinu implant within each and every one of us the gilui of the Etzem HaNefesh, that not only does the Rebbe shake and rattle and inspire the core of our being, and not only does he put us in a position of Aveda Bekeach Atzmei, that now it is our job to make a taste for his Gilui Eir and Etzem HaNeshama. In Eis Yud Beis sagt the Rebbe that just like Tetzaveh B'nei Yisrael v'yikchu eilecha, is that Moshe is mitzaveh, and directly through the tzivui of Moshe, there's an inyan of a yikchu eilecha, says the Rebbe, that the yikchu eilecha is not simply aveda b'keach atzmei, that the aveda b'keach atzmei is being nurtured and is being fed and is being uplifted and inspired, animated and energized by the Rebbe continuously. 20 years ago, we had the schus to come to the Rebbe as a community for the first time, to spend Shabbos by the Ohel. And at the end of that first Shabbos, a Yid who's sitting here tonight, said that he feels three emotions at once. He feels Tisha B'Av, he feels Yom Kippurim, and he feels Simchas Torah. He said, I feel Tisha B'Av because I never got to see the Rebbe, and I could have. He said, I feel Yom Kippur because I feel cleansed. And he said, I feel Simchas Torah because I have the schus, I have the privilege to be a chassid of the Rebbe. Teire Brüder, der Rebbe lebt mit uns, zwischen uns. What is in our domain, what is in our docket, is to choose to be mekasher ourselves to the Rebbe. And through our efforts at hiskashrus, we are able to be zeiche, to feel the Rebbe's presence, and to be transformed by it. And I will finish with this. Without 3 Prokim Rambam, you cannot be a Mekusher, my friends. I'm sorry to read you the Riot Act. It's a fact. Am lernt nicht kein Rambam, kann man nicht sein kein Chassid. There is one thing that a Chassid is able to do every single day of his life, to respond to the Rebbe's call, as the Rebbe is mitzaveh u'mekasher esanu. And that is to learn 3 Prokim Rambam. When they proposed in Hayayim to write Sheyishtadel Lilmed Gimel Prokim, the Rebbe crossed out the word Sheyishtadel. Lilmed Gimel Prokim. And those who taka can't, and I don't think that includes almost anybody sitting in this room, those who taka can't, the Rebbe gave the option of Perek Echad and even of Sefer HaMitzvahs. Limud HaRambam on a daily basis, my friends, is not an option. Kora Korev, Korev El Hashem, says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, is Korev and Kedem Lebrocha. If we do not meet the Rebbe, so to speak, in some level, can call it halfway, somewhere, if we do not shake ourselves, if we don't shake the dust off, and if we're not prepared to make that effort and not prepared to follow the Rebbe's instructions, the Mesha Yitzaveh, Yitzaveh means before connect, means command. The Rebbe gave us instructions. The Rebbe told us we have an obligation to learn 3 Prokim of Rambam every single day. The Rebbe told us we have an obligation to learn about Inyonei Geula Mashiach und zu leben mit Mashiach. And the Rebbe said if we do not learn about Inyonei Geula Mashiach, can we not leben mit Inyonei Geula Mashiach. And the Rebbe said that that is the Derech HaYoshar. When we will follow what the Rebbe told us, in Limud HaTeirah mit Gimel Prokim Rambam and the Limud of Inyonei Geula Mashiach b'miyuchad, to be asek, to immerse ourselves in the Rebbe's holy miftzayim, reaching out to each and every single yid, and to follow the Rebbe's rotzen, that men zeiche sein, gar bigen gichen im Erz Hashem, zenzach mit den Rebben. And as I told a group of young boys I was Farbrengen with Shabbos, I said, Kinderlach, when you will meet the Rebbe, nobody will have to introduce you. The Rebbe sees each and every one of you, and the Rebbe knows you. And it will be the greatest reunion of all time. Amen.